7 days before graduation, the air in Boulder held that crisp edge that comes just before dusk, the kind that makes the mountains look sharper against the fading sky. I sat on my porch, a mug of tea cooling between my hands, telling myself to focus on the week ahead. I'd earned this degree in my early 30s while working full-time, long nights of reading under a single lamp, weekends sacrificed to essays and projects, and the quiet discipline of building a life from scratch. This wasn't just another party on a family calendar. This was my moment to mark every mile I'd walked alone. Inside, the hum of voices drifted from the dining room. My parents had insisted on a casual dinner with extended family to kick off the celebration. I walked in to find Melis, my older sister, already at the head of the table beside her fiancé, Draven. She smiled when she saw me, but it was that taut kind of smile you wear when the cameras are rolling. As I took my seat, she leaned slightly toward me. "I hope you keep your speech short at the toast," she said, her tone wrapped in lightness that didn't match the steel in her eyes. People lose interest when someone talks too long about themselves. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a needle slipped under the skin. I set my napkin in my lap and met her gaze. "I'll keep it meaningful," I said, even, measured. She gave a little laugh. "Humility's a good look up there." Around us, conversation about travel plans and restaurant reservations bubbled on. I let her words hang without biting back. There's an old saying I've learned to live by. Some folks will tell you the sky's the limit, right before they clip your wings. That was Melis. If she couldn't be tallest in the room, she'd find a way to make the room shorter. Dinner carried on with clinking silverware and polite chatter. I kept my attention on my plate, answering questions from cousins and uncles, but my mind kept circling back to the glint in her voice. These things always came dressed as advice, but they carried the weight of warning shots. I'd learned the hard way that reacting too soon only fed her performance. So I stayed quiet, logged the moment, and kept my face as smooth as the table linen. When the evening wound down and the last of the guests left, I lingered in the living room, the faint scent of roasted chicken and wine hanging in the air. I poured myself a glass of water, settled into the couch, and pulled out my phone. That's when I saw the notification. Zoran Pike, one of Draven's closest friends, had tagged me in an Instagram story. It was a photo of a counter lined with beer bottles, the caption reading, "Grad party about to get wild." My thumb hovered over the screen. Maybe it was nothing, just Zoran being Zoran. But the beer emoji made me pause. I wasn't a drinker, and he knew it. Memories flickered. Last Thanksgiving, when he'd thought it was funny to swap my sparkling cider for actual champagne just to watch my reaction. The summer barbecue when he'd accidentally knocked a plate of ribs into my lap. He liked to turn someone into the punchline and see how long it took them to notice. I scrolled away from it, telling myself not to overthink, but the image stayed lodged in my mind like a splinter. It wasn't about the beer, it was the tone, the choice of words, the timing. These people didn't just plan celebrations, they planned narratives. By the time I put my phone down, the house was quiet again. I turned off the lights in the kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, and walked back to the couch. I'd just started flipping through a book when another message popped up. This one was from Melis. "Can't wait to see what you're wearing for the toast. Hope it's not too flashy." I read it twice. Flashy. She knew exactly what my gown looked like. It had been hanging in my closet for weeks, a navy sheath I'd chosen precisely because it was understated. This wasn't curiosity, it was framing the conversation before I even stepped onto the stage. I leaned back, phone resting on my thigh, and let my eyes drift to the window. Outside, the mountains loomed dark against the twilight, steady and unmoved. I thought about the way Melis had steered the dinner conversation, about Zoran's post, about the tiny undercuts that were always dismissed as jokes when called out. Family gatherings had always been a minefield, smiles covering barbs, traditions masking rivalries. I'd grown up in a house where applause was rationed and criticism came in generous portions. You learned to carry your victories quietly because celebration drew fire. Still, I'd told myself this week would be different. I'd imagined the toast as a clean moment. Me, in my gown, speaking my truth, surrounded by people who could, just this once, let me have the light. But as the clock crept toward midnight and the quiet settled heavier around me, that image felt fragile. I sipped the last of my tea, the warmth fading as quickly as my optimism. "It's just nerves," I whispered to the empty room, though the words rang hollow. I knew better. Nerves are about you. This was about them. The message from Melis still sat open on my phone, the smirking face winking back at me. I locked the screen, set it face down, and let my gaze return to the mountains. In the darkness, they looked unshakable. I wished I felt the same. I had no way of knowing it then, but this, her text, the beer post, the dinner conversation, was the first crack in the week ahead. And cracks, once they form, have a way of spreading until the whole thing gives way. The morning after that uneasy dinner, I arrived at my parents' backyard earlier than I needed to. I told myself it was so I could help set up for the brunch, but the truth was I wanted to claim some space before the house filled. Early summer light filtered through the elm trees, scattering gold across the freshly mown grass. The smell of brewed coffee drifted from the patio, mingling with the savory scent of bacon and biscuits warming in the oven. My mother moved briskly between the kitchen and the folding tables set in the yard, pausing only to adjust a floral centerpiece. A few relatives had already gathered in small clusters. Their voices carried easy laughter, the kind that made you feel welcome, if you were in the circle. Across the lawn, I saw Melis and Draven, both encircled by cousins, like magnets pulling the conversation toward them. Draven gestured animatedly, one arm slung loosely around Melis's chair. I walked toward a group near the fence, positioning myself where I could catch snippets of different conversations without hovering like an outsider. Still, the invisible rope line was there, subtle but strong. Sometimes no one needs to push you out, they just build the circle without you in it. Oren, my uncle, clinked his coffee mug with a spoon. "Before we eat, how about a quick toast to this exciting week?" he called out. People lifted their cups, some trading them for glasses of juice or champagne. Draven took the lead, moving around the yard to clink glasses with each person. I watched as he made his way toward me, expecting the light tap of his glass against mine. Instead, his eyes flickered, deliberate, and he turned to the next guest without pause. I held my cup a little higher. "Guess I'll drink to myself," I said, letting the words land in the open air between us. A few people chuckled under their breath, the kind of awkward sound that's more about diffusing tension than finding humor. No one called it out. Draven gave a thin smile over his shoulder, like he'd tripped, but didn't care enough to apologize. Inside my head, the calculation was already running. That wasn't a slip, it was a test, a way to stake his ground without leaving fingerprints. There's an old American line I've carried with me. Sometimes the loudest insult is the one dressed as an oversight. I sipped my coffee and met his eyes when he glanced back. I wanted him to know I'd noticed, even if I wasn't giving him the scene he might have hoped for. Breakfast followed, and I sat through it with polite smiles, answering questions about my plans after graduation, deflecting advice I hadn't asked for. The plates were cleared, and the air shifted into that post-meal lull when people either wander off or start in on coffee and dessert. That's when Melis appeared beside me, holding a small gift bag. "This is for you," she said brightly, as if we were the kind of sisters who exchange surprises just for the joy of it. I reached inside and pulled out a plastic graduation cap, the kind you'd find in a dollar store bin. The tassel hung by a few loose threads, and the seam was already separating at the edges. "Just in case you lose the real one." Melis laughed, a little too loudly. I turned the cap in my hands, felt the lightweight, brittle plastic beneath my fingers. I smiled, careful and contained. "Thoughtful," I said, placing it gently on the table beside me rather than on my head. Her laugh faded into another conversation before she moved away, but I stayed seated, fingers resting on my coffee cup. It wasn't about the cap. It never was about the thing itself. It was about the message. This was part of a long pattern. The joke that wasn't just a joke, the dig wrapped in bright paper. I decided not to address it now. Some slights are better banked, stored in a quiet ledger until the right moment arrives. That moment wasn't here yet. When the gathering began to thin, I drifted toward the side garden with a fresh cup of coffee. The roses along the fence were just starting to bloom, their petals unfurling into the sunlight. The air smelled sweeter here, away from the noise. I stood beneath the shade of an old maple and let the quiet settle over me. There's an art to not reacting, especially when the other person is baiting you to do just that. If you give them the performance they're waiting for, they've already won. Maya Angelou once said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." This morning had been one of those moments. I replayed it in my mind. The mist clink, the plastic cap, the smirk that came too quickly. Layered on top of Melis's text from the night before, it no longer felt like a scattered set of annoyances. It felt like a structure being built, piece by piece, for a purpose. The unease I'd been carrying since last night began to solidify into something sharper. They weren't just making casual missteps, they were setting the stage for something. And I'd need to be ready. As I circled back toward the patio, Draven stepped into my path. His expression was smooth, practiced. "Hope you're ready for a big surprise this week," he said, voice light but with that thin thread of challenge running through it. I stirred my coffee slowly, met his eyes. Surprises work both ways. He smiled without warmth, then walked away to join another conversation. I watched him go, a knot of resolve tightening in my chest. I didn't know then just how soon I'd be tested, or how public the next move would be. But I could feel it coming, as surely as you can feel the air change before a storm. The next surprise wouldn't wait until graduation. It was coming that very night. The drive back from my parents' house was short, but every stoplight felt longer than usual. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other draped over my lap, my coffee cooling in the cup holder beside me. The chatter from Brunch still replayed in fragments, and the sting from the glass left unraised lingered like a bruise under the skin. That plastic graduation cap Melis had handed me was on the passenger seat, still in the cheap gift bag. I'd considered leaving it behind but decided against it. Sometimes keeping the evidence close was more useful than tossing it away. Downtown Boulder was bustling. People filled the sidewalks, cafes spilling onto the streets with outdoor tables. It was the kind of lively, easy Saturday scene that should have lifted my mood, but instead, it only emphasized the weight in my chest. Their smiles felt like a different universe from the one I had just come from. By the time I reached my apartment, I was craving the quiet. Unlocking the door, I stepped into the stillness. The air was cool and faintly scented with lavender from the candle I'd forgotten to blow out last night. Here, without the constant hum of voices, the words from Brunch echoed louder. I set my keys down, placed the gift bag on the counter, and stood for a moment in the middle of my living room. The quiet was both a relief and a mirror. It let me hear everything I'd tried to push aside. It wasn't just Draven's deliberate skip of my toast glass or the smirk that followed. It wasn't just Melis's little joke wrapped in shiny paper. It was the pattern behind them, the rhythm I knew too well. I sank onto the couch, knowing these moments didn't stand alone. They were threads in a larger weave. That afternoon, right after brunch, the conversation had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. We were still seated at the table, plates pushed aside, when my mother looked up from her coffee and said, "Your sister could have graduated too if she'd had the money you had." The words landed heavier than the clink of any glass. I kept my voice steady. "It wasn't just money, Mom. It was years of work, late nights, double shifts." She waved a hand, cutting me off. "Still, money makes things easier." Melis sat across from me, not saying a word, just letting that small, satisfied smile play at the edges of her mouth. I didn't answer further. This wasn't new terrain. My mother had a knack for dimming the light on any achievement, always finding a way to attribute it to luck or circumstance rather than effort. I'd once heard someone say, "Some people hand you a gift and make sure you know it's secondhand." That was her specialty. The hurt wasn't sharp anymore. It was a familiar dullness, like pressing on an old scar. So I'd let the moment pass in silence, choosing not to throw fuel on a fire they were clearly happy to tend. But the ember smoldered. Back in my apartment now, I reached for my phone to distract myself. A new email had come in from a name I hadn't seen in years, Paul Henderson, a former coworker from the nonprofit where I'd volunteered a decade ago. The subject line read, "Recognize this guy." I opened it, and my stomach tightened. Attached was a scanned newspaper clipping, the edges yellowed, the headline reading, Board member steps down amid questions over fund mismanagement. In the grainy black and white photo, there was no mistaking the face, Draven Korrick. The article explained how he had been quietly removed from his position after discrepancies were found in the financial reports. No charges had been filed, but the language was careful, almost polite. Mr. Korrick's resignation allows the board to move forward. I clicked through to cross-check online, and there it was again in a different archive. Same facts, different spin. So that's why you've been so smug, I murmured to myself. You think no one here knows. The knowledge shifted something in me. This wasn't just interpersonal pettiness anymore. It was leverage. Dangerous leverage. If he thought his past was buried, that made it a live wire I could hold. The higher the horse, the harder the fall, I thought, remembering another old saying. I could almost see him in my mind, perched on that imagined high ground, certain the view was his to keep. I closed the laptop, not because I wanted to stop reading, but because I needed to decide what to do with this. You don't play a card like that immediately. You wait until the hand is right. Evening began to fall outside my window, the light softening over the mountains. I made a cup of tea, the ritual steadying my thoughts. Sitting at my small dining table, I opened a notebook and began writing the day's events in bullet points. I've done this for years. It keeps me from letting isolated moments slip away unconnected. Skipped glass at toast. Plastic cap gift. Mom's comparison at table. Email from Paul about Draven. Looking at them lined up on the page, the pattern was no longer vague. Malis, Draven, even my mother, they were unusually aligned in their behavior toward me this week. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordinated. Oprah Winfrey's words came to mind. You get in life what you have the courage to ask for. I'd spent too long accepting the version of family they offered me. Conditional support, muted applause, and public slights dressed as humor. My phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. It was a group text from Malis, Draven, and my mother. Special dinner at our place the night before graduation. Don't be late. I stared at it for a moment, the word special sitting in quotes like a wink you didn't want to see. My reply was short, sure, but my mind was already moving. Special, huh? I said out loud to the quiet room. Let's see who it's special for. By the time I closed my notebook and set my tea aside, one thing was certain. When that dinner came, I'd know exactly what cards I was holding and who I'd play them against. The night before graduation, I pulled up outside Malis and Draven's condo with my shoulders squared and my pulse steady. From the street, the place looked like something lifted from a glossy real estate ad. Clean lines, wide windows, a porch light that glowed just a little too perfectly. Inside, the glow was warmer, but the air held the faint tautness of a room where everyone was performing. Family I'd known my whole life mingled with a few of Draven's friends, men and women I'd seen in passing but never trusted. Their smiles were polite but measured, like they were studying me in return. Malis glided over in heels that clicked like punctuation, wrapping me in an overly tight hug. Her perfume hit strong, clinging like a statement you couldn't shake. "Come on in," she said, guiding me toward the dining area. That's when I saw it. My graduation gown, still in its garment bag, hanging near the corner. I hadn't planned to wear it tonight, yet here it was as if it belonged in their display. I smiled faintly, but inside I marked the move. This wasn't hospitality. It was staging. Every surface here looked curated, every candle perfectly placed, and yet, underneath, I could feel the current, polite on top, but humming with something else. While chatting with my aunt near the buffet, Malis appeared again. "Let me help you unpack the gown for a little pre-toast photo," she said lightly, already moving toward it. Minutes later, her voice rose across the room. "Oops, I may have left a little love on it." I turned and saw her holding the gown out by its shoulders. A bright, unmistakable smear of lipstick blazed across the white trim, too bold to miss, too perfectly placed to be accidental. Gasps and small laughs rippled from a couple of nearby guests. "Don't worry," she said, her tone a shade too sweet. "You can probably get it out. Maybe." I walked over slowly, meeting her eyes. My voice stayed calm. "Maybe, I repeated, taking the gown from her hands. Inside, my mind was already making the note, not just the act, but the way she had done it in full view, daring me to overreact. I knew better than to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I excused myself and carried the gown to the bathroom. I laid it carefully over the counter, took out my phone, and photographed the smear from multiple angles. Evidence, neatly catalogued. My grandmother used to say, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me." This was twice, and I wasn't about to let it pass unrecorded. When I came back out, Malis was laughing with Draven near the bar. My seat at the table was ready, my name card tucked neatly beside a folded napkin. I sat, the gown safely zipped away again, and unfolded my graduation toast notes from my bag. Malis reappeared, a glass of water in hand. "Here, you'll need this if you're going to practice." She placed it beside me with a flourish. I was scanning the first lines of my speech when her elbow slipped, tipping the glass over. Cold water spread instantly, soaking the note cards. "Oh no, you should keep backups on your phone, you know," she said, that same edge of humor in her voice. I gathered the wet cards, rising from my chair. "Good thing I do," I said evenly, heading for the kitchen. As I passed the reflection in the sliding glass door, I caught the small, satisfied curve of her mouth when she thought no one was looking. In the kitchen, I spread the cards on a towel, pressing gently to dry them. My mentor's words came back to me. Never let them see you scramble. They weren't trying to ruin tonight, they were trying to ruin me. By the time I returned, the first course had been served. Draven was telling a story, gesturing broadly, and laughing in a way that seemed just a little too free. I sat and let the small talk wash over me, asking him about work, about a recent trip he'd mentioned before. When Malis was in control, he seemed relaxed, even smug. The dynamic was telling. He didn't need to move the pieces when she was doing it for him. I filed that away. This evening wasn't just a social obligation. It was reconnaissance. Every slight, every calculated mishap was another line in the ledger I was building. The irritation I'd walked in with had cooled into something sharper, more deliberate. As the plates were cleared, I stood to leave. Malis walked me to the door, her smile bright, her eyes knowing. "Can't wait for tomorrow. It's going to be unforgettable." "I'm counting on it," I said, my gaze shifting to Draven just over her shoulder. What they didn't know was that I'd already started planning how to turn their unforgettable into their undoing. The graduation luncheon was held in one of downtown Boulder's newer event halls, all glass walls and polished wood floors, the kind of place meant to make people feel important just by walking in. Families were everywhere, parents in tailored suits, siblings clutching cameras, children darting between tables. There was a hum in the air, a mixture of pride and anticipation, and for a moment, stepping through the doors, I wanted to feel it too. I signed in at the reception desk, accepted the program, and scanned the seating chart mounted on an easel. My eyes traced down the list of names until I found mine. Row 12. Table by the restrooms. I walked toward it, hoping maybe it was a mistake, but no. The card with my name was placed neatly on a table, half hidden behind a service station. From here, the scent of bleach from the cleaning closet drifted in whenever the door swung open. I glanced at the other graduates, their seats positioned near the front, angled perfectly for photographs. My stomach tightened. They didn't just give me a seat, they gave me a message. As guests filed in, some offered me polite smiles. Others glanced quickly away, as if being seen talking to me in this corner might draw attention. A cousin I hadn't seen in years slowed as she passed. "Why are you sitting here? Shouldn't you be up front?" she whispered. I smiled faintly. Apparently not. Across the room, Malis caught my eye and waved, her expression the picture of innocence. Draven leaned toward her, saying something that made her laugh. I looked back at my program, letting the moment pass. Confrontation now would only feed their performance. I pulled out my phone and discreetly took photos of the table, the seating chart, the distance from the podium. Documentation mattered. Some insults aren't shouted. They're reserved for print. Lunch was served. Grilled chicken, wild rice, roasted vegetables. I made conversation with the people at my table, none of whom I knew. Most were polite, Though their eyes occasionally flicked toward the prime tables where the other graduates sat, I could feel the subtle weight of being misplaced, like a guest at her own event. As dessert plates were cleared, the host stepped up to the podium. "Now we'd like to invite our graduates to share a few words," she announced, her voice bright with ceremony. My pulse lifted, despite everything. This was still my moment, no matter where they'd put my chair. I reached for my clutch and pulled out my backup notes, neatly typed, laminated after the water spill from the night before. As the first speakers finished, I smoothed my dress and made my way toward the stage. The applause quieted as I stepped to the podium. I looked out at the room, rows of expectant faces, cameras poised. "Good afternoon," I began, but before I reached the second sentence, the microphone sputtered and went dead. A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. The tech assistant hurried over, fumbling with the cables. "Just a second," he muttered, but a second turned into 30, then nearly a minute. From the corner of my vision, I caught Draven leaning toward a friend, lips curling in a smirk. The friend chuckled, covering his mouth as if that would hide it. "No mic? No problem," I said, projecting my voice to the back of the room. Laughter, genuine this time, broke through the tension, and I kept going. I spoke of the years it had taken to reach this point, the sacrifices, the nights when giving up had seemed easier than pushing forward. I thanked the professors who had challenged me, the friends who had stood by me, the community that had given me purpose. I didn't mention family by name. As I spoke, I felt the shift in the room. People leaned in. They were hearing me, even without amplification. If they take your stage, build your own. By the time I reached my closing line, "Some milestones are earned, not given," I let my eyes rest on Malus and Draven. The applause was polite, measured. Some faces looked genuinely moved, others were unreadable. I returned to my table, my breath steady, my hands relaxed. My water glass was gone. In its place sat an open beer, condensation dripping down the side. I hadn't ordered it. The drink wasn't an accident. It was a preview. By the end of the night, that beer would be more than a drink. It would be their weapon. The luncheon had barely ended when we were ushered into a smaller adjoining hall for the pre-toast gathering. The tables from earlier had been cleared, replaced with high cocktail tables draped in white linens, and waitstaff in black vests moved between guests carrying trays of champagne, wine, and sparkling water. Soft jazz floated from the speakers, polished, non-intrusive, the kind of background music that makes a room feel calmer than it really is. I moved through the clusters of guests, exchanging nods with people I recognized and introducing myself to a few of Draven's friends I'd never met. They were polite in the way people are when they have no real interest in you, smiling just enough, their eyes already flicking past to find someone else. I'd seen that look before. It was the same one I got from Malus's circle at family parties, the kind that says, "You're here, but you're not one of us." Near the bar, Malus stood with Draven, both leaning in toward a small group. Their heads tilted together, laughter spilling from their corner in soft bursts. From across the room, it looked casual. Up close, I knew it was deliberate. They were talking about something, or someone, and given the way Draven's eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment, I was willing to bet it wasn't the weather. It's not paranoia if the smiles don't reach their eyes. The host called for attention, inviting graduates to share a few words before the evening's main toast. I walked toward the small platform, feeling the eyes that followed me, some warm, some cool, some weighing. Halfway through my opening, I noticed them. Draven's friends, including Zoran, clustered together at a side table. At first I thought the low murmurs were harmless, but then came the stifled chuckles, the sideways glances, the hand over the mouth to hide a grin. They weren't subtle. I paused mid-sentence, letting the silence stretch just enough. My eyes found theirs. "I'm glad my words are entertaining," I said, my tone even but clear. "That means you're paying attention." The room shifted. A few guests, those with a sense of basic decency, nodded faintly. The whispers stopped. I finished my remarks without breaking stride, refusing to let them see more than that measured response. If they can't match your level, they'll try to pull you down to theirs. And if you let them, they win twice, once in the act and again in your reaction. When the applause came, polite but present, I stepped down and made my way toward the bar. I wanted water, something cold and grounding, before I had to talk to anyone else. That's when I saw Draven. He was holding a beer bottle, giving it a casual shake, like a man distracted. Then he set it on a tray a passing server was carrying. The movement was subtle, almost lazy, but there was a precision to it, enough for me to know it wasn't idle fidgeting. I didn't take my eyes off the bottle as the server moved away. Minutes later, that same server approached me. "Beer?" he asked. I smiled, declining. "Sparkling water, please." The beer moved on, landing in the hands of a man across the room. He popped the cap, and a sharp spray shot upward, dousing his shirt. The reaction was instant, a shout, a startled laugh, and the sound of several others joining in. From my vantage point, I caught Draven's performance, his widened eyes, his exaggerated, "Whoa, didn't see that coming," and the tight grin that followed when the crowd's attention shifted. The people around him laughed like they were in on a harmless prank. But I knew better. This wasn't about that guest. This was a dress rehearsal. When someone rehearses a joke at your expense, the punchline will be sharper next time. I turned away, not because I wanted to ignore it, but because watching any longer would only sharpen my own expression into something they'd see. They wanted me anticipating, bracing, wondering when the hit would come. I cataloged both incidents, their table laughter during my speech and the beer trick. On their own, either could be explained away. Together, they were the outline of what was coming. A public moment, something to make me look foolish in front of the entire room. Likely at the main toast, I wasn't going to stop it. Not yet. If they thought I was unaware, they'd be less careful, more obvious. And when people like that get obvious, they make mistakes. Across the room, Draven caught my gaze. He lifted another beer in a mock toast, the same smirk curving his mouth. I held his stare, just long enough to let him know I'd seen it. That beer was never meant to be just a drink. It was bait, and I knew exactly when they planned to set the trap. The transition from the soft hum of mingling to the sharp formality of the main toast felt like a curtain being pulled. The warm overhead lights brightened, casting a golden sheen on the tables, and the low music faded into a hush. The host stepped up to the microphone with a practiced smile, calling my name as one of the honorees. Polite applause rolled through the room, that measured kind where hands meet more out of obligation than enthusiasm. I walked toward the podium, my heels steady on the polished floor, and let my gaze sweep the crowd. Malis sat near the center with Draven beside her, both wearing matching smiles that stopped short of their eyes. They looked satisfied, like the next move in their game was already in motion. Draven cradled a beer bottle instead of the champagne flute everyone else held, his fingers tapping lightly against the glass as if counting down to something. Everything in me said this was the moment they'd been building toward. I began my speech, thanking the host, acknowledging the graduates, letting my voice settle into the rhythm I'd practiced. That's when Draven's voice cut through the air. "Wait!" he called out, loud enough to jolt the room. He stood, lifting his beer high in a mock toast as he strode toward me. The smile on his face was broad, almost friendly, but his eyes told the truth. This was the hit. In one quick motion, he tipped the bottle and splashed it forward. The cold liquid burst across the front of my gown and splattered the microphone, sending a static crackle through the speakers that made several people flinch. Gasps swept the room. A few people laughed, others froze in stunned silence. I steadied myself, one hand gripping the podium to keep from stepping back. My gown clung heavy and damp, but I kept my chin level. Into the malfunctioning mic, I said, "Guess the refreshments have arrived early." A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the room. I didn't reach for a napkin or try to brush the beer away. Instead, I adjusted the mic stand, ignoring the sticky trail down my arm, and continued speaking. "You can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails." I was 3 sentences in when Draven's voice rang out again, this time louder, his tone cutting. "Now you match your GPA!" The implication hit as intended, a jab meant to paint me as barely passing, undeserving of the degree I'd worked for. Nervous chuckles flickered from a few tables, others turned their eyes away, uncomfortable. I looked straight at him. "You're right. I said, my voice carrying even without the mic. I did work hard for this GPA, and every drop of this gown, I'll make sure it tells a story you'll remember. A low murmur moved through the crowd, and then, unexpectedly, a few people began to clap, slow at first, then with more certainty. They weren't just responding to my words, they were responding to the fact that I refused to fold. Mayless, though, was grinning, her satisfaction unhidden. She leaned toward Draven, whispering something that made his mouth curl in amusement. I memorized the way they looked in that moment. This public stunt wasn't just cruelty, it was leverage, and they'd just handed it to me. I shifted my focus back to the audience, forcing the room's attention back where it belonged. My voice rose over the clink of glasses and the faint rustle of movement. I finished the story I'd prepared, about perseverance and the value of building something brick by brick. This degree wasn't handed to me, I concluded, letting the silence stretch just enough before the final words. It was earned, one challenge at a time. The applause this time was fuller, though still mixed. I stepped down from the podium with my head high, my pace unhurried. As I passed their table, Draven leaned toward me just enough for his words to be heard. Hope you can take a joke. I didn't break stride. Hope you can take what's coming next, I replied, my tone low but deliberate. Because after tonight, the joke wouldn't be on me anymore. The room had split down the middle, though no one would say it out loud. One half pretended nothing had happened, chatting about weekend plans and dessert trays, as if a beer hadn't just been thrown on me minutes earlier. The other half was buzzing, voices lowered but eyes darting toward me in quick, guilty flashes. I could feel the hum of it, that tense mixture of fascination and discomfort. Some guests avoided looking at me altogether, as though eye contact might force them into choosing a side. Others offered sympathetic glances from a distance, the kind you give someone you can't, or won't, walk over to stand beside. In moments like these, you learn exactly who is willing to be seen standing next to you. And tonight, that number was painfully small. From across the room, I spotted Mayless leaning in toward Sorella. They were angled just enough to be in their own private bubble, faces lit with the kind of glee people try to hide but fail to contain. Then, quick as a camera flash, I saw it. Mayless's hand lifting, palm out, meeting Sorella's in a swift, satisfied high five. They didn't even glance around to check if anyone saw. That alone told me everything I needed to know. They believed they'd just pulled off a perfect play. My mind replayed Mayless's earlier words from the night before. Can't wait for tomorrow. It's going to be unforgettable. Now, in the wake of this, it felt like she'd been narrating her own victory lap. Every instinct screamed at me to march over, to let my words slice through that smug satisfaction. But confrontation now would be playing by their script. Instead, I filed the moment away, committing every detail to memory, the timing, the expression, the careless confidence. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I had no intention of serving it lukewarm. I turned away, scanning the crowd until I found my father. He stood alone near the edge of the room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the mingling with the detachment of someone who saw but didn't enter. I approached, expecting at least a quiet word, a squeeze of my arm, something to show he'd noticed what had just happened. Instead, he shook his head, almost imperceptibly. "Let's not make this worse," he murmured, and then he walked away. The absence of his defense cut deeper than the beer. It wasn't just that he didn't step in tonight, it was that this wasn't the first time. I could feel the old memories surfacing, uninvited but sharp. Birthdays where my accomplishments were overshadowed by Mayless's needs. School events where my name was mispronounced and no one corrected it. Times I'd come to him with something unfair, and he'd counseled patience, telling me keeping the peace was more important than making a point. Keeping the peace at the cost of justice. That was the pattern. It had been his way all his life, and now it was staring me down in a fresh wound. If no one will stand with me, I thought, I'll stand for myself. That decision settled in my bones as I made my way back through the crowd. The whispers seemed to follow me, a shadow that clung no matter where I moved. Every smile I passed felt weighed, calculated. I found the host, thanked her politely for the evening, and said I'd be heading out. I kept my posture tall, my pace even. I didn't look toward Draven or Malus, didn't give them the satisfaction of catching my eye. In my mind, I was already reconstructing the sequence of the night, the high five, the look on Sorella's face, the way the microphone had cut out, the deliberate arc of that beer. Every piece of it was evidence, and now I had the shape of the whole. I stepped out into the cooler air beyond the event hall, the noise of the room fading behind me. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification. I pulled it from my clutch and saw I'd been tagged in a video on social media. The thumbnail was unmistakable. Me at the podium, gown soaked, mouth mid-sentence. I tapped it open. The clip played in full. The gasp from the crowd, the sticky shine of beer dripping from the fabric, the look on my face as I steadied myself. The caption read, "When the toast hits harder than the speech, they wanted an audience." And now the whole internet was watching. The cool night air hit me the moment I stepped out of the event hall. For the first time in hours, I was away from the heat of the lights, the clinking glasses, and the stifling politeness masking open hostility. I wanted quiet, but my phone had other plans. Notifications flooded the screen, TikTok tags, message alerts, and comment pings stacking one over the other. I tapped one of the links, and there it was. The beer moment, already clipped, captioned in bold white letters. When the toast hits harder than the speech. The view count ticked upward in real time, tens, hundreds, then thousands. In the comment feed, strangers were taking sides, some defending me, others calling it just a joke, or worse. They'd wanted humiliation. What they got was publicity, and I knew how to use that. I replayed the video, this time watching the edges instead of myself. From the left frame, Malus was clearly visible, her lips curling into a smirk right after the splash. To the right, Sorella clapped twice, small, quick, like she was afraid of being too obvious but couldn't resist the gesture. I paused the clip there, zooming in until their expressions filled the screen. I took screenshots, one after another, adding them to a growing folder on my phone labeled Receipts. Scrolling through the comments, I started reading some out loud in a flat voice, just to hear them outside my head. "This looks planned." Screenshot. "That guy should be ashamed." Screenshot. "I'd have walked out if I were her." Screenshot. The internet never forgets, and this wasn't just a passing embarrassment. It was something that could follow them for years if I handled it right. Back at my apartment, I peeled off the beer-soaked gown, but didn't throw it straight into the laundry. Instead, I hung it where I could see it from my desk, the faint amber stains under the light, a reminder of what was at stake. I sat down, opened a new post draft, and began typing. "Thank you to everyone who's reached out tonight. I'm fine, and there's more to the story. Stay tuned." Neutral enough to avoid looking defensive, but edged with enough curiosity to make people wonder. I didn't post the smirk or the clapping yet. Let them stew. The anticipation was as much a weapon as the reveal. I switched to my messages and found Lexar Vaughn in my contacts. Lexar wasn't just a journalist. He was the kind who knew where to dig, the kind who didn't mind getting his hands dirty for a story worth telling. "Remember that lead I told you about?" I typed. "It's bigger now. Call me." He rang within minutes. "You've got my attention," he said. I told him about Draven's past, how he'd been quietly removed from a nonprofit board over financial discrepancies, how that history lined up neatly with the man who had humiliated me tonight. I laid out the beer stunt, the smirk, the clapping, the years of small calculated cuts leading to this public slice. Lexar's voice sharpened. "Send me everything. Financial records, board minutes, anything you've got. I'll cross-reference and pull what I can. If we run this, it won't just be about tonight, it'll be about a pattern." "Good," I said, "because I'm not interested in a single blow. I'm interested in ending the game." By the time we hung up, the tightness in my chest had shifted. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was on offense. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed again, the vibration sharp in the quiet apartment. The message was from an unknown account. "If you want the full story on Draven, meet me tomorrow. No family." I stared at the words, my reflections still holding my gaze in the bathroom mirror. It looked like my list of allies had just grown, and I was ready to hear what they knew. The cafe was tucked into the corner of a side street, the kind of place where the hiss of the espresso machine could almost drown out the morning traffic. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the slow curl of steam rising from mugs at scattered tables. I chose a spot near the back, away from the glass, where I could watch the door without being in anyone's direct line of sight. The message from the unknown account had been short, just an address and a time. I'd looked it up before leaving my apartment. A safe choice, public enough to feel less like a trap, but quiet enough for a serious conversation. When the door swung open, the man who stepped in scanned the room with the same kind of practiced caution I'd used. Mid-40s, pressed shirt, the sort of plain gold wedding band that looked more like habit than devotion. I recognized him before he reached the table. "Thane Morris," he said, offering a handshake. "I worked with Draven, back at the nonprofit." We both sat. The coffee in front of me was still too hot to sip, so I kept my hands wrapped around it, grounding myself in the warmth. "I saw the video," he began, "and I saw your name in the tag. Thought maybe it was time to put some cards on the table. Sometimes allies arrive not because they like you, but because they hate the same enemy." Thane didn't waste time with small talk. When Draven left the board, it wasn't voluntary. He siphoned funds. We had records, bank transfers, fake vendor invoices. The board was ready to move forward with charges, but he threatened a lawsuit for defamation, claimed we couldn't prove intent. They offered him a resignation deal. Quiet exit, no headlines. I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "How much?" "North of 200 grand. And he wasn't just taking the money, he was rewriting reports, intimidating anyone who asked too many questions. I got my car keyed after I spoke up in a meeting. I can't prove it was him, but..." Thane gave a slow shrug that said everything. "Why come forward now?" I asked. He hesitated, eyes dropping to the coffee between us. Fear kept me quiet before, my career, my family, but seeing him in that clip, smirking like he's untouchable, made me realize staying quiet was just letting him keep the upper hand. When you corner a rat, it'll show its teeth, and Thane had clearly decided it was time to put Draven in the corner. He reached into his bag and pulled out a laptop, flipping it open. "I've got everything here. Board minutes, bank statements, and this is the real gem, emails, ones he thought were deleted." I moved my chair closer as he navigated through folders. My own reflection in the screen looked steadier than I felt. The documents were meticulous. Meeting notes where concerns were raised but dismissed. Spreadsheets with columns that didn't add up unless you knew which cells to check. Then the emails, one from Draven to a colleague bragging about his creative accounting and how the old guard wouldn't know what hit them. "Forward me everything," I said. "I'll keep it secure." Thane looked at me carefully. "This is enough to blow a hole through whatever image he's built, but once it's out, there's no putting it back in the box." "That's the point," I said. He tapped a few keys, sending the folder to my encrypted account. My phone buzzed as the files came through. Proof doesn't just speak, it roars if you know when to play it. Back at my apartment, I cleared my desk and laid out my own notes. The timeline from the first sabotage to the beer stunt. I drew arrows between incidents, circling the ones I could use to anchor the embezzlement story. The high five between Malus and Sorella. The mic cutting out. The beer throw. Each one fed into the same narrative, character and intent. The play became clear. I wouldn't drop this in a press release or on social media where they could spin it. No, I'd deliver it in a room where they'd have to look me in the eye, with no way to talk over me. I called Lexar. "I'll have something for you soon," I told him. "When I give the word, it goes live. All of it." "Just say when," he said. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about a reckoning. They'd turned my celebration into a spectacle. I was about to turn their lives into a case study in consequences. That evening, I composed a group text to Malus, Sorella, Draven, and my father. "Brunch tomorrow at my place. I have something important to share." I could almost feel the ripple of curiosity, the sudden calculation in their minds. They wouldn't be able to resist coming, and they wouldn't be ready for what I had planned. By tomorrow, they'd know exactly how it feels to be the one on display. By the time the sun edged high enough to spill through my living room windows, everything was in place. The table was set with quiet precision. White plates, linen napkins folded into clean rectangles, coffee cups placed at perfect angles. I'd arranged the chairs so Draven, Malus, and Sorella would sit directly across from me, each with an unobstructed view of the evidence I planned to lay in front of them. The menu was deliberately neutral: fresh fruit, quiche, and warm croissants. Nothing fancy, nothing they could accuse of being a show. Soft jazz played low from the speaker, creating a calm, almost disarming backdrop. If you control the room, you control the outcome. My mentor's voice echoed in my head. I paced once around the table, mentally rehearsing each point, each reveal. The visuals would speak for themselves, but the delivery had to be sharp. This wasn't about shouting them down. It was about making the truth undeniable. The knock came at precisely 11. I opened the door to find all three of them together, with my father a half step behind. The air between them felt tight, like they'd been talking on the way up. "Smells good," Malus said lightly as they stepped inside, her eyes flicking over the table. "Help yourselves to coffee," I said, my voice warm but measured. Small talk filled the first few minutes. Weather, parking, a comment about the flowers on my windowsill. Their words were casual, but their glances told a different story. I waited until everyone had food on their plates and their mugs filled, then I set my fork down. "I want to start by talking about last weekend's toast," I said. "I've reviewed multiple videos from guests' phones, and I want you all to see something." I tapped my tablet, and the screen lit up with a still image, me at the podium, beer dripping from my gown, and in the background, Malus and Sorella mid-high five. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Malus leaned back in her chair, lips tightening. "That's out of context." "Is it?" I swiped to the next image, zoomed in to capture the timing, just seconds after the beer hit. I let the moment sit before moving on. "Now, let's talk about Draven's history. I have printed copies here. Emails, board meeting minutes, and bank statements from your time at the nonprofit." Draven gave a short laugh. "This is old news." "Old news becomes very new when it resurfaces in the right hands," I replied, sliding the papers across the table. The color in his face shifted as he scanned the email where he'd bragged about creative accounting. "Where did you—" he started. "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that I can prove it." Sorella sat stiff, her eyes darting between them, saying nothing. My father's gaze stayed fixed on his plate. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," I added. "And it's shining right here." I leaned forward. "You have two options. Draven, you step back quietly. No more family events, no more proximity to anything with my name attached, or I give Lexar the go-ahead to publish this, with every piece of evidence attached." Malus's voice rose, sharp. "You're trying to destroy the family." "Family doesn't humiliate you in public and call it love," I shot back. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the jazz track still playing in the background. Sorella's shoulders slumped. She stared down at her coffee as if it might offer a way out. Draven's jaw worked, but his words came slower now. Maybe we can work something out. Keep this between us." "There's no deal without accountability," I said. "And accountability doesn't happen behind closed doors anymore." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The rest of the meal was quiet, every bite chewed in tense silence. When the plates were cleared, I walked them to the door. Draven paused on the threshold, his eyes sharp. "You think you've won?" "Winning isn't my goal," I said, letting a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. "Truth is?" And by the end of the week, the truth would be printed for everyone to read. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing so relentlessly, it felt like it was vibrating through the nightstand. For a moment, I thought it might be another round of pointless family messages. But the screen lit up with Lexar's name and a single link. I opened it, and there it was. Front page placement on the local paper's site, mirrored across 3 regional news outlets. Former nonprofit treasurer linked to embezzlement, viral video ads public spotlight. Draven's name was bold in the headline, his smug face caught mid-toast in a still from the beer incident. The story pulled no punches. a full timeline of his nonprofit tenure, annotated screenshots of board minutes, copies of the damning emails. Right under the main image was the embedded clip from the toast, beer flying, mic crackling, my gown dripping. Paired with the documents, it was impossible to laugh off. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs the right stage. By mid-morning, social media was ablaze. Hashtags with Draven's name trended locally, then bled into state-level feeds. People I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. Some offered congratulations for standing up. Others accused me of airing family laundry. Both groups proved the same point. Once the truth is out, you don't control how it travels. Local news anchors discussed it on air, their voices tinged with that mix of disapproval and fascination. Draven's employer posted a terse statement distancing themselves from any conduct unbecoming of our leadership standards. Melis's curated friend circle started showing cracks. A few unfollowed her, others posted vague loyalty quotes that fooled no one. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. I'd been in that kitchen long enough to know the heat never really goes away. You just decide whether you're cooking or being cooked. It was just past noon when the knock came. I half expected it. I opened the door to find Melis, Sorella, and Draven standing there, my father conspicuously absent this time. "You've ruined lives," Melis said before I could even step aside. I gestured them in. "No, you ruined your own. I just stopped covering for you." Draven stayed standing, arms folded, trying to loom. "Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," I said plainly. "And so does everyone else. You can't put the smoke back in the chimney." For the first time since the toast, his bravado cracked. He looked at the floor, then at Melis, as if she might still have a way out tucked in her pocket. Sorella stayed silent until the very end, when she finally said, "Maybe we should have treated you better." It wasn't an apology. It was an observation, like she'd just noticed the sun was out. I didn't respond. My mind was already moving forward. I walked them to the door, opened it, and waited. They shuffled out, Draven pausing just long enough to mutter, "This isn't over." "It is for me," I said, and closed the door gently but firmly. The apartment was bright, sunlight spilling over the dining table where my laptop still sat open to Lexar's article. I realized for the first time in years, the air in my own space felt unclaimed. No shadows of their disapproval, no waiting for the next ambush. I made tea, sat by the window, and let myself think about what came next. Not in terms of revenge or defense, but opportunity. A short trip, maybe, somewhere quiet, with enough distance to hear my own thoughts without their static in the background. Maya Angelou's words surfaced unbidden. "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." Later, I pulled the stained graduation gown from the back of the closet. The beer marks had faded into pale rings, but they were still visible. I folded it carefully, placed it in a box, and wrote on the lid in black marker, "Evidence reminder." I slid it onto the top shelf, not as a wound to reopen, but as proof of what I'd endured and what I'd chosen to do about it. They taught me the cost of silence. I chose to pay in truth.